Hey, Talk Tickers listeners. I know you guys are used to us diving deep into the latest earnings calls,
Right.
but today we are going off script.
Oh.
We got some breaking news
Okay.
that just hit the wires, and it's got the financial world buzzing.
Yeah.
And we can't resist digging into it a little bit.
All right, lay it on me.
Okay, so get this. Donald Trump just announced that he will not be removing Jerome Powell from the Fed
Oh, wow.
before his term ends in 2026.
That is, that's pretty big.
Now, if you followed Trump's first term,
Right.
this is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
The guy was constantly blasting Powell's policies,
Yeah.
even calling Fed officials boneheads on social media.
Oh, my goodness.
There were even some sources that say that he even considered firing Powell back then.
Wow. So what's interesting here is the irony.
Yeah.
Many people see Mariner Eccles,
Okay.
a key figure in shaping the modern Fed back in 1935, as a champion of Fed independence.
Hi.
But the reality is he actually wanted the opposite. He believed that the president should have full control over the Fed, able to swap out leadership whenever they pleased.
Wait, so you're saying the guy who basically built the Fed as we know it wanted the president to be calling the shots on monetary policy?
Exactly.
That seems
It is.
kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does, and it's crucial to understanding why Trump's announcement is causing such a stir.
Yeah.
You see, Eccles argued that aligning monetary policy with the administration's goals was essential.
Okay.
He even testified before Congress back in 1935,
Wow.
saying that he'd resign if a new president took office during his time as Fed chair.
Huh.
And guess what? 10 years later, when Truman took over after Roosevelt died,
Yeah.
Eccles offered to resign.
Oh, wow. So he actually
He walked the walk.
walked the walk.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
But if Eccles wanted a Fed controlled by the president, how did we end up with the independent Fed we have today?
Well, not everyone was on board with Eccles' vision. You had some powerful figures pushing back hard against his ideas.
Like,
Folks like Henry Morgenthau,
okay,
the Treasury Secretary at the time,
right?
and Frank Vanderlip,
Hmm.
a former Assistant Treasury Secretary.
Okay.
They were worried about the dangers of political influence on monetary policy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They wanted the Fed to be like the Supreme Court,
Oh,
making decisions based on what's best for the long-term economic health of the country,
right.
not short-term political wins.
I see. So it sounds like there was a real clash of ideologies going on back then.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, the pro-independence camp won out.
They did, and that's why understanding this history is so important.
Yeah.
To ensure the Fed's independence, Congress made some key structural changes in the 1935 Banking Act.
Okay.
First, they gave board members these super long 14-year terms and staggered them so no single president could appoint a majority.
Okay.
That way, no matter who's in the Oval Office,
Right.
the Fed's leadership wouldn't swing wildly with each election cycle.
That's pretty clever, building safeguards right into the system.
It is.
But how did they protect board members from getting fired just because the president disagreed with their policies?
That's where the four-clause removal provision comes in.
Okay.
It basically means a president can't just fire a board member because they don't like their interest rate decisions.
Right.
There has to be a legitimate reason,
Okay.
like misconduct or negligence.
Got it.
Yeah.
So these safeguards are all in place.
Yeah.
But what does this all mean for us?
Right.
The financial world watchers.
Yeah.
What's the significance of Trump choosing not to remove Powell, especially given his history?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
On the surface, it seems like he's respecting this precedent of Fed independence,
Right.
but could there be more to it? Is this a calculated political move? Is he trying to send a message to the markets? It really makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes. Welcome back to Talk Tickers, everyone. We've been digging into this bombshell announcement from Trump that he won't be removing Jerome Powell from the Fed.
Right.
And, it's really got us thinking about the delicate dance between presidential power and Fed independence.
Yeah, it's definitely more nuanced than it might seem. At first glance, we were just discussing how Congress built all these safeguards into the Fed structure back in 1935 to prevent exactly this kind of interference. But it's not like those safeguards just appeared out of thin air.
Right. Remember Mariner Eccles, the guy we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
The one who actually advocated for presidential control over the Fed?
Right.
Well, get this. He ended up being a key figure in actually implementing those very safeguards that Congress put in place to ensure Fed independence.
Hold on. So you're telling me that the guy who wanted the president to be running the show ended up being the one to set up the system that prevented that from happening?
It is.
That was one.
It is, but remember, Eccles was a pragmatist. Once Congress made its decision, he got on board and focused on making the new system work. He even served as Fed chair under Truman, despite having different views on how the Fed should operate.
So in a way, Eccles became a bridge between these two opposing visions of the Fed.
Exactly.
He started out wanting presidential control, but ended up being a crucial part of establishing the independent Fed we have today.
Exactly. And that's what makes his story so relevant to what's happening right now with Trump and Powell. It shows us that even when there are strong disagreements about the Fed's role, the institution itself is built to endure and adapt.
Speaking of adapting, remember that for-cause removal provision we talked about?
Right.
The one that protects Fed board members from being fired just because the president doesn't like their policies. Well, it turns out there's actually some legal uncertainty surrounding that provision.
Yes. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
See, back in 1926, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Myers v. United States that the president has the sole power to dismiss executive branch officials,
Okay.
and that any restrictions on that power were unconstitutional.
So at least when it comes to executive branch officials, the president has a pretty free hand.
Right.
But what about independent agencies like the Fed? Where do they fit into all of this?
Well, that's the gray area.
Okay.
While the Senate was debating the Banking Act of 1935, the one with all the Fed independent safeguards,
Yeah.
the Supreme Court was actually considering another case, Humphrey's Executor v. United States,
Okay.
which dealt specifically with the president's power to remove the heads of independent agencies.
Okay, so two cases, two different contexts. What was the outcome? Did the Supreme Court uphold the president's power to just fire whoever they wanted?
Actually, no. In Humphrey's Executor, the court ruled that Congress could indeed limit the president's ability to dismiss personnel from independent agencies, including the Fed. This meant that the for-cause provision in the 1935 Banking Act, the one intended to protect Fed independence, actually had some legal backing.
So the idea that the president can't just fire a Fed chair willy-nilly is rooted in legal precedent.
Right.
But you said there was some uncertainty surrounding this.
Yes, it's not a completely closed case.
Yeah.
The specific wording of the for-cause provision has been debated over the years, and some legal scholars argue that it might not be as ironclad as we think.
Which brings us back to Trump's decision not to remove Powell.
Right.
Even though he may have had the legal grounds to do so, he chose not to.
Exactly.
That's got to mean something, right?
It definitely does. It sets a powerful precedent. Regardless of all the legal intricacies, it reinforces this norm of Fed independence that's been so carefully cultivated over the years.
And that independence is crucial for the Fed to do its job.
Effectively, just imagine the chaos. If every time a president didn't like the direction of interest rates, they could just fire the Fed chair.
Oh my goodness. It would completely undermine the Fed's credibility and make it impossible to focus on long-term economic stability.
Exactly. The Fed needs to be able to make decisions based on sound economic principles, not political pressure. That's precisely why Congress designed the Fed as a bulwark against those short-term political whims in the first place.
But as we've seen with Eccles' story, this idea of Fed independence has always been challenged and debated. Who knows what the future holds? What new challenges might arise?
That's what makes this whole thing so fascinating, right? It's an ongoing dialogue. And as we move further into the 21st century, the role of the Fed and its relationship to the political sphere will continue to be a topic of debate and evolution.
Well said. You know, we've covered a lot of ground here today, from breaking news to Fed history to legal precedents. And it all started with a single headline. It just goes to show how everything is connected in the world of finance.
It's a reminder that sometimes even a seemingly simple event like Trump choosing not to remove Powell can unravel a whole tapestry of history, economics, and legal precedent.
You're absolutely right. And on that note, let's take a quick breather before we move on to part 3. We'll be back in a flash to explore an outrageous but plausible trade idea based on all of this. Stay tuned, Talk Tickers listeners. All right, Talk Tickers listeners, welcome back for the final stretch of this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, from Trump's surprise announcement to the history of Fed independence, and even some legal precedents that might make your head spin.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey.
It really has. And speaking of unexpected twists and turns,
Okay.
it's time for our favorite segment. This is not financial advice. Get ready for an outrageous but plausible trade idea,
All right.
inspired by all this Fed drama.
I love it. I'm ready. Let's hear it.
Okay, so we talked about how Trump's hands-off approach to the Fed
Right.
could mean less pressure for rate cuts, potentially leading to higher long-term interest rates.
Yeah.
But what if,
Okay.
despite Trump's intentions, there's like a sudden surge in inflation?
Ooh, that's interesting. Okay.
What happens if inflation comes roaring back?
Yeah, what happens then?
Well, in that scenario, the Fed might be forced to like slam on the brakes, raising interest rates aggressively
Oh.
to try and tame inflation.
Okay.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
What if this rate hike cycle spooks the stock market?
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So inflation spikes, the Fed hikes rates, and the market takes a nosedive.
Exactly.
What's the play here?
Well, what if we looked at a long-dated put option on the S&P 500 ticker symbol, SPY?
Okay.
Think of it as like an insurance policy
Okay.
against a market meltdown.
Right.
If the market tanks because of these like unexpected rate hikes,
Mm-hmm.
this put option would become incredibly valuable.
Okay, so that's a bold move for sure.
Yeah.
We're basically betting that Trump's desire for a hands-off approach backfires, inflation runs wild, and the Fed has to step in with some serious firepower.
Exactly. But remember, we're dealing with a lot of unknowns here.
Right.
We're assuming Trump actually sticks to his hands-off approach.
Right.
We're assuming inflation does indeed make a comeback. And we're assuming the market reacts negatively to the Fed's response.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of ifs.
A lot of ifs, and that's not even considering the possibility of a black swan event, something completely unexpected that throws our entire thesis out the window.
Oh yeah, there could be like a major geopolitical event.
Exactly.
A game-changing technological breakthrough. Who knows the future is full of surprises.
Absolutely, and that's precisely why we call this segment This Is Not Financial Advice. It's all about exploring possibilities and stretching our imaginations, not making specific recommendations.
Exactly. We're just trying to get those mental gears turning and consider different scenarios. So Talk Tickers listeners, please don't run out and buy SPY put options just because you heard it here.
No. We're just having some intellectual fun, exploring potential outcomes. Always do your own research
Yes.
before making any investment decisions.
Couldn't agree more. This is about expanding your thinking, not your portfolio, at least not without some serious due diligence first.
Very well said.
Well, Talk Tickers listeners, that wraps up our deep dive into this breaking news about Trump and the Fed. We've gone from a seemingly simple headline to a fascinating exploration of history, economics, and even legal precedents.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It has, and it all goes to show that in finance, like in life, the only constant is change. And sometimes the most unexpected events can have the most profound consequences. So keep your ears tuned, your mind sharp, and as always, happy deep diving. We'll catch you on our next episode. We'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming, dissecting the latest earnings calls and uncovering hidden gems in the market. Until then, take care.